Firstly, I want to thank the Australian people for believing in our nation, in our great nation, in the goodwill of this country, and understanding that the vast majority of Australians want what's best for each and every one of us, including our most marginalised Indigenous Australians. The Australian people have voted overwhelmingly say no to this referendum. They've said no to division within our constitution along the lines of race. They've said no to the gaslighting, to the bullying, to the manipulation. They've said no to grievance and the push from activists to suggest that we are a racist country when we are absolutely not a racist country. We are one of the, if not the greatest nation on the face of the earth. And it's time for Australians to believe that once again, to be proud, to call ourselves Australian, because until we can be proud, we can't form a position where we can be strong to tackle our tough issues within our country. I am grateful for my family's support throughout this campaign, my wonderful husband, Colin Lilly, our sons, my parents that taught me to stand up for those who are disenfranchised, those who are voiceless, to be a warrior for them. I want to thank the Fair Australia campaign, Matthew Sheehan, Stephen Doyle. I want to thank my wonderful colleagues in the coalition, the leadership of Peter Dutton and David Littleproud, the Nationals, for coming out, drawing a line in the sand and saying no to this proposal very early in the piece, so that Australians could understand that it was okay. It was okay to recognise that this was a bad proposal, a proposal that the Prime Minister failed to provide detail on. When we kept asking questions, we weren't receiving any answers whatsoever. We could not be shown with any clarity, or it could not be demonstrated how this proposal was supposed to support our most marginalised Indigenous Australians, those who belong to some of my close family members. For me, my family experienced 3 funerals yesterday. For me, my family are still sitting in communities where largely they have been exploited for the purpose of somebody else's agenda. This referendum has yet been another one of those agendas where it was suggested that 80% of Indigenous Australians supported this proposal when we knew that was not the case. When I knew, having spoken to people throughout the Northern Territory, to Indigenous people from the Northern Territory and right across the country, particularly in my role as the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, that a vast group of Indigenous Australians did not support this proposal. And it has been a shame that throughout the campaign that we have been accused of misleading this country through disinformation and misinformation when it was a campaign of no information whatsoever. And that we called out where the Australian people were being misled, whether it was the claim that 80% of Indigenous Australians supposedly supported this when we know that they didn't, when it was the claim that this was just a simple advisory body, when the words advice, advice, or advisory didn't even appear in the question nor the proposed chapter. The Australian people were misled, and the Australian people saw this for themselves. And that is why the Australian people decided to vote no to this proposal. I look forward to the future. I realise that much work has to be done for us to be brought together as a country, because it has been such a challenging and heart-wrenching time for many Australians. For those of you that voted yes, please know that we as a coalition have always got the best interests of all Australians at heart. We want to make sure that we are fighting for a better future for all Australians. But going forward, we need to prioritise where our most marginalised are. As I've always said, the gap doesn't exist between Indigenous Australia and non-Indigenous Australia. It exists between our most marginalised that we know whose first language is in English, who live in remote communities, and the rest of Australia, including the middle class Aboriginal Australia that are doing really well for themselves, for ourselves. We need to focus our efforts to where our marginalised exist. And we need to listen to their voices. And as Peter said, no longer listen to the voices of the activists, of those pushing ideology onto us. The Australian people have said no to this. The Australian people want practical outcomes, a unified country where we can move forward together. Once again, I want to thank the Australian people for delivering this result. We hear you loud and clear. Thank you.